Hello and welcome, boys and girls. My name is Miss Cindy, and I am your host for today. This is your teacher, Miss B. Today's lesson is titled, What's It Like in Space? We have learned that many astronauts have been beyond Earth to space. We have learned that Mae Jemison is a female that traveled there along with Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin. But what is it like in space? Today, we will explore space and how it is different from Earth. We will also discuss figurative language and how the phrases can add detail to writing and help with understanding of the text. By the end of today's lesson, we will be able to compare and contrast what it's like in space and Earth and determine the literal and non-literal meanings of some common phrases and sayings. Astronauts are people who study space at NASA and travel to space on missions. Many astronauts have been to space and discovered how life in space is. Mae Jemison was the first African-American female to travel into space on the spaceship Endeavour. Let's get ready to jump into some figurative language fun.
Boys and girls, I am so excited to be back with you all and get to start off this lesson with some figurative language fun. Figurative language is when you use a word or phrase that does not have its normal, everyday, literal meaning. An idiom is an expression whose meaning goes beyond the literal meaning of its individual words. Idioms often use figurative language, meaning that what is stated is not literally taking place. Have you ever heard someone say a feather in your cap? Say a feather in your cap. What is a cap? Yes, it's a hat. This idiom refers to an accomplishment that is worthy of praise. Memorizing all of the multiplication tables, for example, can be a feather in your cap. This 17th century idiom comes from an ancient Native American and Asian custom. Warriors placed a feather in their headgear for every enemy they defeated in battle. We previously read about Mae Jemison. Which of Jemison's accomplishments could be seen as a feather in her cap? You're right. Becoming a doctor and an engineer, serving in the Peace Corps, and being the first African-American female astronaut are all things worthy of being a feather in a cap. When Mae Jemison became the first African-American female in space, someone could have told her, that accomplishment is a feather in your cap. The reason for this is because it used to be that only men with backgrounds as jet pilots were considered for becoming astronauts with NASA. So when she became an astronaut, Jemison broke many boundaries for not only women, but African-American women, all because she worked hard to develop herself as a scientist and follow her dreams. In the text, the idiom out of this world is used. What do you think out of this world means if I said, this delicious cake is out of this world? Did you picture a piece of cake floating in outer space? If so, you were thinking of the literal meaning. However, the idiom out of this world is meant to have a non-literal meaning in that sentence, which is that it tastes so good. So going back to the text, it said, Mae Jemison's dreams took her out of this world. Does the sentence mean to use out of this world in a literal or non-literal way?
It literally means that Mae Jemison went to outer space to achieve her dream.
You are so right, Mrs. Cindy. In the previous sentence, this delicious cake is out of this world has a non-literal meaning. And in the sentence about Mae Jemison's dreams, the sentence has a literal meaning because she really went there. Sometimes authors will use a play on words to add to their writing and make a connection to their topic using figurative language. Let's discuss one more idiom today. The author references in the text the phrase launch pad. It said, Jemison has used her fame as a launch pad to bring important issues into the public spotlight. The literal meaning of launch pad is a place where the spaceship or rocket sets for launching. What do you think launch pad means in the sentence, Jemison has used her fame as a launch pad to bring important issues into the public spotlight?
I think it means that she used her fame as a way to jumpstart her mission of creating her own company and space camps for kids.
Yes, Mrs. Cindy, that is correct. She did not literally use a launch pad, but she used the phrase launch pad to show how she started her next mission. Guess what, boys and girls? It's vocabulary time. In today's text, you will hear words that are related to space. Have you ever heard the word gravity? What do you think it means? Gravity is the mysterious force that makes everything fall down towards Earth. Unlike Earth, the Moon has very little gravity. If there is almost no gravity in space, will things thrown in the air fall down?
I don't think so, Miss B. I think from the things we have read that they will float in the air.
You are correct, Mrs. Cindy. If things are thrown in the air or fall off or out of something on Earth, they will always move back towards the ground. However, in space, things will float away due to the lack of gravity. We will also hear the term oxygen. Oxygen is the air we breathe. Plants and animals need oxygen to survive. Let's take a moment to breathe in some of that wonderful oxygen. Now, before we begin reading, let's discuss the graphic organizer we will use today during our lesson. Raise your hand if you can tell me what type of graphic organizer this is. Correct. This is a top hat chart that we will use to compare and contrast what it is like in space and on Earth. We will pause our reading to complete the chart as we go. Let's begin reading what it's like in space. As Mrs. Cindy reads today, I want you to keep these close reader habits in mind. The first one is to listen or follow along in the text. Next is to pay close attention to the question mark icon because a question will be asked that will require you to use evidence from the text. And last but not least is to try your best to answer the questions. Okay, I don't know about you all, but I'm ready to learn all about what it's like in space. Let's begin our reading now.
What's it like in space? Since Apollo 11, many more astronauts have traveled in space. Scientists have learned that there are many differences between Earth and space. One of the biggest differences has to do with gravity. Remember that gravity is a force of attraction that pulls things toward one another. The force of gravity on Earth is pretty strong. Even the best jumpers can only jump a few feet off the ground. Let's try it. Stand up and see how high you can jump. If you want to jump high, you will have to fight against gravity. Remember that on the Moon, astronauts Aldrin and Armstrong were easily able to jump up high. They didn't come down quickly either. Instead, they seemed to float down slowly. That was because the force of gravity on the Moon is not as strong as on Earth. The Moon is not as big as Earth, so the force of gravity is not as strong on the Moon. If you think that is cool, wait until you read what happens out in space, away from the Moon or planets. Out in space, astronauts do not feel the effects of gravity. They and their spaceship are moving freely in space. Since the astronaut and spaceship are moving freely together, the astronauts look and feel as if they are floating.
It's time for our first text-specific question. Why is the force of gravity not as strong on the Moon?
That's right. In this part of the text we read, "The moon is not as big as Earth, so the force of gravity is not as strong on the moon." Let's keep reading. Up in space, lots of things are different. You can do a flip and not worry about whether you will make it all the way around before you come down.
Wow, we've read some interesting facts so far. Let's stop to compare and contrast using our top hat chart. Let's start with our first fact about space that's different from Earth. We read in the very beginning that space had little to no gravity, so let's add gravity is weak in space here. Since we are contrasting ideas, let's go ahead and add Earth has a strong force of gravity. Remember when the astronauts Aldrin and Armstrong floated in space? Why was that? You all are too smart. That was possible because people and objects can easily float in space. So what's the opposite of that on Earth? Correct again. Things do not float on Earth. We've listed two differing facts about Earth and space. Now, let's think about what we've read that makes them the same. Can people do flips on Earth and in space? Yes, they can. So here we will add, astronauts can flip in space and Earth. However, according to the text on the last page we read, you don't really have to worry about flipping all the way around because of the weak force of gravity. So we can add, completing a flip is optional under the space side. And our last fact we will add will be, you must complete a flip before hitting the ground under the Earth section. You all did such an amazing job on that. We have some more reading to do so we can learn even more, so we can make sure to listen closely to the rest of the chapter.
Eating is different in space too. I'll bet when you eat lunch at school, your food stays where you put it. If you set it on the table, it stays there until you pick it up. The force of gravity holds it down. But if you were up in space, you and your food would be moving freely together. If you let go of it, your food might drift away. There are other differences in space besides less gravity. Do you remember the astronauts on the moon had to carry tanks of air for breathing? Another way outer space is different from Earth is that there is no air or oxygen at all in outer space. Look again at the image of the astronauts inside the spaceship. The astronauts are not carrying tanks of air. That's because oxygen is being pumped inside the spaceship. Since there is no air in space, you also do not hear sounds in outer space. It is also very cold in space. The astronauts must train many months before going into space so they know what to expect. Do you think you would like to go into space someday?
Time for our second question. Why are there no sounds heard in space?
I can tell you all have been listening. This part of the text that is highlighted says, since there is no air in space, you also do not hear sounds in outer space, supports our answer to the question.
It's that time again. Now that we've finished the chapter, we can definitely add more facts on the top hat chart that we learned about space and Earth. Did you notice any differences that we could add to our chart?
I notice a difference, Miss B. Your food stays where you put it on Earth, but it moves freely in space.
Is there something similar, though?
Yes. People eat in space and they eat on Earth.
Great. We can add people eat on both under the similarities. We can include food floats under space and food stays put under Earth. Did you hear more information that we can add to our chart? Let's think about oxygen. What is different about oxygen on Earth and oxygen in space?
I remember the text saying there was no oxygen in space, but we have oxygen on Earth. Can we include that on the chart as a contrast?
We sure can, Mrs. Cindy. Let's add no oxygen under space and oxygen under Earth. What could we see as a similarity for oxygen?
How about people need oxygen in both places?
That is a great inference. Let's add that under both Earth and space. I remember the story referring to sound. The sentence read, "Since there is no air in space, you also do not hear sounds in outer space." What do you think we should include on our chart? Yes, we should include quiet under space and noisy under Earth. Today we have explored what it is like in space and compared it to what it is like on Earth. Let's review our chart. When we compared Earth and space, we found we can flip on both. People must eat on Earth and in space. We also noted that people need oxygen on both Earth and in space. When we contrasted Earth and space, though, we found that there is a strong force of gravity on Earth, but a weak force of gravity in space. We discovered that people and objects do not float on Earth, but they float pretty easily in space. If you did a flip on Earth, you might better complete that flip, or it might hurt. But in space, it doesn't matter if you complete the flip or not. And on Earth, your food stays where you put it, but it moves freely in space. Let's review the idioms we discussed today. Our first one was a feather in your cap. Can you remember what that means? Great. It does mean something that has been accomplished and worthy of praise. Maybe the feather in your cap can be learning about Mae Jemison, and let that inspire you to become an astronaut or an explorer one day. Also, remember in the text, Mae Jemison used her career and knowledge as a launch pad to start organizations that inspired young people to learn more about space and science. What will be your launch pad? That's awesome. The last idiom we learned was out of this world. In the text, the author used it in a literal sense. However, what is something you've accomplished this school year so far that can be considered out of this world in a non-literal way, meaning special or awesome? Boys and girls, you did a wonderful job learning and using these idioms that all connected to the hard work that Mae Jemison put in to achieving her dreams. Do you want to learn more about space and journeys to space? If so, you can visit the following websites with an adult's permission. And of course, we always encourage all boys and girls to keep reading new and exciting books to build their knowledge. So here are some great titles that you can check out at your school's library or your local libraries. Boys and girls, we appreciate all of you for joining us today as we explored what it's like in space. And we can't wait to see you all back soon to learn about the International Space Station. We also want to thank Core Knowledge Language Arts publicly for allowing us to share all of this wonderful information with you today. Goodbye. See you next time.